What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF case review, and today we'll be taking a look at the NV9 from Phanteks. Now this case launched about mid-December last year, so it has taken us a little while to get around to this case review. Now you might be thinking, hey, this NV9 looks humongous going by the size of the box. Well, most of you guys always comment on my videos just how big these cardboard boxes look to when I'm sitting here. Now I'm not that overly large, so that's probably why this box completely towers over me. But in saying that, the NV9 I would say is about an inch larger all round than the NV7. Now in this video I will be comparing some of the differences between the NV9 to the NV7, and then I'll be going over all the new features, all the new water cooling support, the new storage options, the new cable management, the rad support. It can now do 420 on the bottom, the top, the side. It can also do 480 on the side and 280 on the rear as well. Now in terms of the time that's build, I've already launched that. I would say it was probably about 1 to 2 weeks ago now, but for those who haven't seen that, I'll throw some of that in towards the end of this video as well. So let's jump in and check out the NV9.
The NV5, 7 and 9 from Phanteks all came out in 2023, and that's quite the accomplishment considering the attention these cases have seen. All three of these cases have some things in common, while on the other hand, some areas are different. To clarify the naming, this is not the higher the number, the better it is scenario. Yes, for some the big NV9 might be better due to holding larger radiators, but I would say each case in the NV series has their own purpose and will come down to the type of user. The NV5, which we actually haven't reviewed, comes in at as low as $100. It's the smallest of the three, has similar external styling, supports EVO XL motherboards, and is more aimed at either air or all-in-one cooling. Mind you though, you could still build a mean little custom loop in the NV5. Moving on to the NV7, which is one of our favorite cases last year, we covered just about every aspect of this chassis in our review while doing 2 custom loop builds, one in the white and one in the black. You can check them out in the description. Personally, I feel the NV7 is a sweet spot in this lineup. It was also the first to launch in the series, and we really weren't sure how their take on this whole pillarless corner glass style chassis would take off. Having that angled base is really refreshing and is probably what sets the NV cases apart to many others. To me, the NV7 is a custom water cooling monster. In our second build in this case, we were able to cram 3 thick 360 radiators and a thick 240 radiator on the rear with a total of 13 fans. Now we find the NV9. From a distance, the NV7 and NV9 are hard to tell apart. Can you tell which one is the NV9 in this shot? While the NV5 has the PSU at the bottom with the shroud making it much easier to identify. The NV9 overall is larger than the NV7 in both width, height and depth. This is mainly due to the NV9 incorporating 420 radiator support in all 3 locations and or a 480 radiator in the side location. Better water cooling support aren't the only changes in the NV9, and we'll cover the new features throughout this review. For a size comparison, the NV5 comes in at 530 high, 242 wide and 479 deep. The NV7 comes in at 590 high, 260 wide and 531 deep, while the big boy NV9 comes in at 614 high, 280 wide and 579 deep, making the NV9 about an inch larger than the NV7 all round. The NV9, and just like the other 2 cases in the series, come in both black and white. The black model has a medium tint to the tempered glass, whereas the white model is 100% clear. Removing the side panels and actually getting inside the NV9 is also the exact same as on the NV7. Pull the rear door at the bottom and out it swings. This now reveals all the thumb screws for removing the top and main side panel, while also allowing direct access to the rear of the chassis. I just love how once that rear door is closed, the case hides every thumb screw out of sight. The view from the back of the case and also the NV7, as they are the same, are just like nothing I've seen before. As I said earlier, exterior aspects of the NV9 are just about identical to the NV7, but there are a few subtle changes. Rear cable management is also the same here, with cable routing for power and rear I/O, while cable management is also found at the bottom for feeding your cables out of the chassis. But one thing I do notice is the rear of the NV9 has less of the ventilated area than on the NV7. I can only assume this is less so we don't see the rear I/O cables through the mesh, and probably didn't need to be so wide in the first place, as the rear dual 140mm fan spots are still covered by mesh. The back side of the case is now raised 65mm off the ground rather than the 59mm we saw on the NV7. This is mainly due to the NV9 just being that little bit larger. The way Phanteks have done this is brilliant. By incorporating a slanted base, the main viewing side is raised off the ground at what I would say at a normal height and looks just about right, but moving around the back and due to that slant, it's quite impressive with just how much intake room we have here. But you could imagine if the whole case was 65mm off the ground, it would just look so out of place. The The only removable dust filter can still be found at the bottom and is removed from the right side of the chassis. The whole right side of the NV9 is now accessed by removing the side panel, which is now one piece. Unlike on the NV7, the side fan and radiator location was fixed to the case, meaning the removable side radiator bracket had to be unscrewed and removed from the main section of the case. Now the side radiator bracket is removed from the right side and, as some call it, the back side of the case. This really helps when building a custom loop, as on the NV7, the side radiator and fans really had to go in first, then the top and bottom radiators next, and if a change had to be done on the side area, the top and bottom radiators had to be removed to gain side access. Having this bracket pop out the back now just makes it so much easier. On the white model of the NV9, the front I/O is now completely white, even the audio combo port. On the white NV7, they're all black. Just like on the NV7, this I/O module is still removable and can be mounted at the rear of the chassis if preferred. Moving to the front panel power buttons, and just like on the NV7, these are still at the top and are exactly the same, but Phanteks have now included a reset button which was missing on the NV7. We still find the dual channel RGB controls up here, which include mode, color and speed. Inside the NV9, we pretty much find the exact same layout as in the NV7, but it's just bigger. Motherboard support is up to EATX, but this time the motherboard area is a fraction larger for both width and height. For an EATX motherboard, the RGB cover on the right side still needs to be removed, flipped and reinstalled. But on the NV7, this area was still tight, even with the ROG Xtreme motherboard. On the NV9 being slightly wider in this area, we now see a 5mm gap to the cable cover, whereas on the NV7, the ROG Xtreme board is hard up against the cover. There's also more room below the motherboard as well, 35mm of clearance on the NV9, while we find 19mm of clearance on the NV7. This really only matters if you're using the very bottom PCIe slots on your motherboard or trying to install a thick bottom radiator. If your motherboard is for some reason larger than these, say like an MSI Godlike, they will still fit as well, but bear in mind you'll need to remove the side cable cover altogether. 24-pin cable routing is still possible due to the cable cutouts being on the front and side edge of the motherboard tray. So if the motherboard covers the full width of the tray, these cutouts can still be accessed from the side. One thing to note here with such a large motherboard is the side radiator location is limited to a 480 or 360, not the wider 420. 3 cable cutouts can be found along the bottom, while 2 more can be found along the top. Just like on the NV7, nothing has changed here. For GPU length, width and CPU cooler height, you'll have no issues here, and there's really no need to cover these again like I did on the NV7. Having no issues on the NV7 in these areas means fitment is going to be either the same or a fraction better here. And just like with the NV7, Phanteks still include the GPU anti-sag bracket with the NV9. This bracket is adjustable and works well. Around the back of the NV9, we find some slight changes here, and mainly to do with cable management. PSU length roughly stays the same here, and you'll have no issues fitting the largest of units up here. One nice touch added on the NV9 is a support ledge to hold your unit in place before you screw it in. Where the power supply sits is quite narrow, and on the NV7 it had the possibility to fall out before screwing it in. Also, 2 Velcro cable ties have been added in the PSU area which aren't on the NV7. One part that has changed up here is the built-in RGB controller has moved more into the PSU chamber on the NV9. You can see on the NV7 it's more on the side and not directly in front of the PSU. Personally, I prefer the NV7 placement as it's not so close to your PSU and cables. Another nice touch I noticed, and this is for the white model only, is that all the I/O and other cables are now white. On the white NV7, these were all black. This isn't a major change, but still nice to have. For storage, I feel we find better support here overall than on the NV7, but boy has the back area been simplified on the NV9. On the NV7, I feel the back storage and cable management was a bit over-engineered. For example, the NV7 had 2 doors and compartments, these weird prongs to wrap excess cables around, and 2.5-inch SSD trays that allowed for stacked drives. On the NV9, we find just 1 door, and I feel there's just so much more room behind the motherboard. Oh, and those 2 prongs for cable management have also been ditched as well. For 2.5-inch SSD support, there's a removable dual drive cage right behind the motherboard, then 4 more drives can be installed on the inside of the swing out door for a total of 6 2.5-inch SSDs. For 3.5-inch hard drives, there's room for 3 on the inside of that same door. You just have to remember this spot is shared with those 4 2.5-inch SSDs. This door is removable if you wish to remove it altogether. Left to the storage area, cable management has been kept the same as on the NV7 with 4 Velcro tie downs for cables like 24-pin power, SATA and so on. Moving on to cooling and radiator support, and this is where the NV9 has had some big upgrades. For all-in-one cooler support, the NV9 will fit up to 420mm all-in-one coolers, and this is something the NV7 wasn't able to do. The top and side locations easily fit a 420mm all-in-one cooler, and the bottom does as well, but I really doubt you'll be using the bottom spot for that purpose. One thing to note that my AIO tubing was tight being installed in the side location. I'll throw up the length of the tubing of the Phanteks Glacier 1 420D30 all-in-one cooler, which I used here, so keep that in mind if you wish to use this spot for an all-in-one cooler. For 360mm AIO support, you'll obviously have no issues either, and personally if you're buying the NV9 for a 360 all-in-one cooler, I think you're wasting your money and you'd be better off going with the NV7, unless you're looking at upgrading your all-in-one cooler to a 420 later down the track. For custom water cooling, the NV9 can house a lot of rad space. I'd like to thank ElphaCool for supporting all the radiators for this review. I've gone with ElphaCool this time as I feel they have some of the largest variety of radiators on the market. They perform great and their white radiators tend to match white cases better than other brands. The top radiator location in the NV9 supports up to 420mm radiators, and there's a whopping 175mm of clearance to the motherboard for radiator and fans. This clearance stays the same as on the NV7, but we now get that 420 rad support up here. Here's a shot of an ElphaCool UT60 420 radiator with 30mm thick D30 fans. Can you believe this is a 60mm thick radiator? Moving to the bottom radiator location, and once again this spot has been bumped up to 420 radiator support, and there's clearance of 152mm to my test at 4090 GPU to the case's second PCI slot, which is the norm for most boards these days. This was with the bottom radiator bracket in its flat position, and with the bracket switched around to its angled position, I now had 142mm of clearance for the GPU. The amount of room now for the bottom radiator area compared to the NV7 is astounding. Trying to fit the same 60mm thick ElphaCool UT60 radiator in the NV7 wouldn't come close to fitting. Both length and width were far too big. On the NV9, this same radiator fits no issues at all. Even width-wise, there's still plenty of room behind for plugging in bottom motherboard cables. Moving to the side radiator location, and as I said earlier, this area has been redesigned. The side radiator bracket is now unscrewed and removed from the back, making installing and removing radiators a breeze. And this bracket supports up to a 420 radiator and now even a 480. On the NV7, neither of these size radiators were supported on the side. The max was the 360 or 4 120mm fans. Radiator clearance on the side location is tricky. With just this spot on its own, clearance is great. It can fit either a 60mm thick 480 or 420 radiator, no problem at all. But clearance issues come into play once a 420 radiator is installed at both the top and bottom locations. Side clearance of the top and bottom radiator with my test UT60 is roughly 98mm for radiator and fans. With a 480 or 420 radiator on the side location, it extends the full height of the case. The issue here is with a thick 60mm thick radiator, the ports come out directly behind the top radiator, leaving minimal room for fittings and tubing. If going with a 480 or 420 on the side with top and bottom 420s, I'd suggest keeping the side radiator to a max thickness of 45mm. This is exactly what I did for my NV9 build in the black model of the case, and tubing up the side radiator wasn't that bad at all. One thing to note with the side radiator bracket is that it sits at the very back of the rear side of the chassis. Like seen on some other cases where there's room in the main chamber and the back chamber, the NV9 side radiator clearance is all in the main chamber. Obviously, going 360 radiators in the top, side and bottom is going to give you much better fitment and clearance, but in saying that, I wouldn't buy the NV9 if you're going down the route of only 360mm radiators unless you intend to upgrade them to 420s later on. Just like on the NV7, Phanteks provide two magnetic covers to help with airflow. These go on the side location, and I found these work best when using three 140mm fans or a 420 radiator. Dropping down to three 120s or a 360, there's still quite a large gap. The final radiator location is at the rear, and this area supports 240 and now even 280mm radiators. There's also 33mm of clearance in the back section between the door for say a slim radiator or an FLT pump res combo running a DDC pump. Just one thing to note, that even though a slim 280mm can be installed in the back section, I was unable to gain access to the ports. Even after flipping the slim 280, ports now cleared, but the rear door would not close. A slim 240 worked fine and is probably the best option here if going with a radiator in the back section. In the main section, rear radiator width will be affected by the top radiator. With an ElphaCool UT60 420 at the top with fans, I had only 54mm of clearance here for rear radiator and fans, or 54mm of clearance just for radiator if you throw the fans in the back section. Here I was able to install an ElphaCool XT45 280 45mm thick radiator in the main section with fans in the back section, but the radiator needs to be flipped with ports at the bottom. Reservoir support, the NV9 has no dedicated pump res mounts, but we can utilize some of the radiator locations for FLTs or flat reservoirs. The two main locations would be the side and the rear. For the side, we need to use either front pump mounted FLTs, distros, or units that come with brackets if the pump is mounted on the rear. Here I had no issues mounting an ElphaCool Core 360 distro or a BitsPower CR360 reservoir. One cool option for the side would be ElphaCool's new 480 flat reservoir they announced at CES earlier this year. For the rear location, I was able to fit a BitsPower CR240 reservoir without brackets so it could sit flush, as the back section of the case has enough room to cater for the pump. Another option is going with Phanteks' own Glacier 260 pump res combo. As this unit is designed to mount perpendicular to fans and not flat, I was able to grab some 15mm M4 standoffs to allow for this to install in the rear location and for that D5 pump to clear that rear door as well.
Now for you guys that haven't seen the final build, let's take a look. Alrighty guys, so that is the final build. I did a few little mods here and there. I guess the main ones you can tell are the custom rad covers at the bottom and the top, and also at the front. I'll talk about those a little bit later on, but apart from that, there's not too much more to talk about on the NV9. Some extras that you can purchase for the case. There's one specifically just for this case, just like there's one specifically for the NV7 and the NV5, and that is the RGB, or they're calling it the premium RGB kit, and that is everything you can see, this lighting that runs around the, I would say, the main side, the bit on the back, and it also loops around the front. And I think this is really nicely aesthetically pleasing. It's nothing in your face. It's not like RGB all over the front. It just adds that nice little RGB aesthetic around the sides of the case, and it's nice and thin. I always love it when RGB is really nice and thin. It makes it really saturated, really contrasty, and you can really see no matter what color you set it to. And as you can see in the video that we just saw, I'll throw some more of the B-roll up. You can see that goldish yellowy color. It really does pop. Now that retails at 70 US dollars, and it comes in the black and the white. Of course, I've got the black one here. Hey, there's nothing stopping you from putting on the white one. You could put the white one on the black case. I don't know how that would look, but it does fit, and it just comes like that, neatly packed. Very, very easy to install. The instructions show you everything on how to do that. It literally just clips in, and I do like it how it's all connected in series. So the ones that break apart, which is here and here, that joins together. This one joins together. The one along here is one piece along the front, and same with the top. So it all joins together, and then it feeds back in that front right corner, and then you just plug it into either the controller or that comes in the case, or you can offload it to the motherboard or something else. But it is good how all the cables are completely hidden. They're not bulking out, sticking out in the way, but I really do like that. 70 US dollars. It's up to you. I'll cover the price of the case later on in the video, but $70 for you guys might be a lot, but hey, people are spending $150, $200 on fans these days, so why not throw some extra RGB in the case as well? Another option, now this isn't specifically for the NV9, this is Phanteks generic vertical GPU riser. Now this is a beast, this is huge. It's got built-in RGB. Now I didn't use this in this build, mainly when you're doing water-cooled builds, it's very hard to install a bottom radiator with vertical GPU mounts. I could have installed a slim or so on, but I think in this case, even this case that has that extra room at the bottom, I would have only got a slim rad with fans, and I didn't want that, so I ended up not using it. This one retails for 100 US dollars. You might think that's a lot, but it does come with that PCI Gen 4 riser cable, and it does have some options that you may have seen. I think Cooler Master were the first ones that do it. You can undo some of these lock-in screws, and you can actually, once it's in, you can actually rotate this bracket, so your GPU can actually be on an offset. I don't think you can quite get 45, but you can get like 30 or something degrees. So when you're looking at your system, your GPU's on a bit of a cool angle, and I think Phanteks do have some images on their website of the GPU. Now that's it for the extras. There's really nothing negative I can really say about this case. Maybe the price point for this over the NV7 is a little bit more. I'll cover that a little bit later on, but you might be wondering now, if you haven't sort of got your thoughts yet of everything else I covered early in this review, would you want this or the NV7? So for the NV9, it is $50 more. So you have to consider that. Are the changes I covered before $50 worth it for you? Things like the improved cable management, I do think that's much better with that single door. Also the better storage support. As I said earlier, it now supports 3.5 inch hard drives instead of one. Most of you guys probably aren't even rocking mechanical hard drives, but for you guys who need more than one, then definitely you have to go with this case unless you are going to run external or something. And then it does have the 420 rad support, 420, the 420 on the side, 480 even, and then you have the 280 on the back, which the NV7 had none of that. The NV7 was 360, 240, 360 on the side, or you could do 4 120 fans, so that was the difference there. So if you are wanting to definitely go 420s, then that'll be the difference. So that's the main changes. And then there were the few other extra things like the white cables on the white case, the perforated slots on the door, which is no difference, and then the front I/O being completely white on the white chassis as well. Now another case I want to compare this to, which is probably the only main rival I can think of in this price point. Like, I'm not going to compare this to something like the Lianli V3000 Plus or the Corsair 1000D, because that's completely in a different price bracket, but I will compare this to the EVO XL. Now the EVO XL is $20 cheaper, so that's something to consider, but apart from that, they are very, very similar. I would say that the NV9 does have the 480 rad support on the side, and something more interesting is, as I said earlier, you can go with an Alpha Cool. They have those 480 distros that are coming out, and that would look really sick running all the way along the top. When it comes to tubing that up, it might be hard if you're having a thick top radiator and a thick bottom radiator, but without testing it, we don't really know. Now, I kind of separate these two cases in two different scenarios between the NV9 and the EVO XL. Now the EVO XL has a lot of features, but not everyone may use them. Like, the case can be inverted, it has the adjustable motherboard tray, it has the removable motherboard tray, and it has the upright GPU. Now for a lot of people, they may not even get around to using those features. So they might say, hey, well, I don't use any of those features. Now the NV9 has less features, I would say, in terms of customization, but it has features that everyone can use. And the main one would be this rear cable door. Now I just think this looks fantastic. If you have this in an office, somewhere where your PC is not against the wall, somewhere like a secret lab desk like this where it has the hidden cable tray, this just looks absolutely amazing. You can run your cabling. You don't even have to run it out the back. They've even got the little holes at the very bottom that you can actually run it underneath, and it is completely cableless. You don't see anything at all. So that would be the main difference. I would say Phanteks have nailed it on the head with the aesthetics, especially around the back, for a feature that everyone can utilize. Rather than having 3, 4, or 5 features that some people may use, everyone can utilize this. And for the very, very few that don't want it, you can take this door off altogether. But for some reason, I don't see why anyone would need to remove that. And then you also have the front aesthetic of this case has that angled base, and I really think that sets it apart from a lot of other cases. So that's my take on those two cases. I want to cover now about my build. Of course, I went with a sort of a gold and black theme. I'm not sure why I did that. I think maybe because I went with MSI. I haven't used MSI for a long time. I use the Z790 Godlike, and I think the MSI high-end theme is kind of that gold yellowish color. So that's what put me towards that. The main mod I did was this acrylic. Now, someone commented that why did I cover the Phanteks D30 fans? Well, technically, yes, I did cover them, but it is smoked acrylic. I tried a lot of different acrylics, different metals, different tints and so on. I wanted something that when the system is off, it looks like it's completely covered up, but when the system is on, now it was very hard to film this, but you can still see through this acrylic and you could still see the light edges on these fans. Now, another thing that made it trouble for me when filming is, unlike the Lian Li fans or Uni fans, the Phanteks D30 fans, you can only control all the lighting at once. So you can't change the center hub lighting compared to the outer lighting. It would have been really good because then I could have dimmed the middle lighting, because of course that is always going to be more overexposed than any other lighting. And then I could have had the side lighting a little bit brighter, and then you would have seen it a bit better. But unfortunately, I could only control all of the lighting at once, and that made it a little bit hard to see. But then again, I think it wasn't too bad because it was just some subtle side lighting. It wasn't like right there in your face. And what I pretty much did was just bought a huge sheet, cut it down to size. Then I also did a miter on the corners there. Up the top, I simply just used a miter saw, got it on the right angle, which was a 45, and then I just did the front angle bit to follow the curve as well. I basically used cardboard to measure it all out first, and then I just cut it all down to size. It actually came out really good. Another thing I had to do with this smoked acrylic, it only came in gloss. So if there's something you want to do to make something matte, you can always buy matte spray paint, or you can buy matte clear, just any type of spray paint like that. I tried a few different brands because sometimes when you spray matte clear on something, sometimes it goes all speckledy. So I tried a few brands, and the brand I used, I might throw up the link in the description, actually came out really good. You can't see any imperfections at all. It pretty much makes it go from gloss to 100% matte, and it looks really good because I didn't really want gloss because you do have the black on the actual case, and if I went gloss here, it would have just stuck out really, really bad. And then the last thing I did, once I did this first, I actually put a gold edge on this edge here and on the bottom edge here, just to add a little bit more of an aesthetic as well. So what I did is when I actually cut all the acrylic down to size, because it has the paper already on acrylic, I just went and spray painted that edge with gold. And then when I went to clear coat it, I just took that paper protector off, and then I just painted the whole lot with that matte clear coat, and then it just went over that gold as well, and it didn't really change too much to that gold anyway, and I think that came out pretty good. Enough on that little mod there. The blocks I used were the CPU and GPU blocks were from Phanteks. That's their new CPU block, which looks pretty nice, and I think it worked well with this system. For this block, that is the Phanteks block, and it is something a little bit different where you don't really get a terminal. If you look on the front, it's completely flush. The terminal is kind of built into the end of the block, so bear in mind this block is a little bit longer than traditional blocks because they have to go past the PCB to add the in and the out ports at the end, and I think that block does look cool. The tubing is the Corsair matte black tubing. tubing. I use this in so many of my builds. It's so easy to use. It saves me having to bend it, then paint it black, which I've done before. Having this Corsair matte black tubing, they also do white, they do frosted, and they do clear. And then at the front, for some of you who got it, I think someone commented when I did the times video that yes, that is an N. I tried to do an N at the front for NV, for the NV9. Of course, it would have been better if I got a V in there somehow, but it was just too hard. That I used clear tubing, and then I wanted to make it really pop just to get that N. So I actually taped off the N bit that I wanted, and then I spray painted the bottom and the top. And when it goes in there, you can really just see the coolant where the tape was covered, where the rest is spray painted black, and I think that worked out pretty good as well. And then the last bit of the hardware are the Bits Power fittings. I went with their carbon black, and then I changed the end 14mm compression fittings for the hard tube to their gold ones to add another bit of aesthetic as well to match the rest of their build. So that's it for that. Main specs 4090, and it does have the 14900K with the Z790 Godlike, D30 Phanteks fans, and then their new also pump res combo. And this does have a D5. You might be wondering how I mounted that. Well, if you're paying attention earlier in the review, as I mentioned, it covered the reservoir support. These ones from Phanteks are not designed to go flat on a side. They're meant to go sideways against fans or perpendicular against fans, because they do have a bit of metal that sticks out the back. Well, if you just use some M4 standoffs, because it does have M4 mounting holes, use some M4 standoffs. I just used a bunch of nylon ones I had. You can buy a pack from Amazon, all different lengths. I just actually put them on there and just raise it out a bit, so that actually sticks out a bit, and that allows the pump to clear in the back. And then I just added this strip of metal so you don't see that gap to where the standoffs are. That pushes it out a bit. So yep, that's pretty much it for that. I think that covers everything on this build. Not really too much to go on about this case. No issues at all. The NV5, haven't done too much on the 5. I have done an NV5 build for a friend. It was a personal side thing. It wasn't for a video or anything, and we actually managed to get dual 360s. They were both 60mm thick in that case, and it was a mean little loop. But in terms of the NV7 and the NV9, I think they've really hit it out of the park with those cases. Now let's go down to price. So for the NV9, you're looking at $250 US for the black or the white. Now that is $50 more than the NV7. Now it's really going to come down to if you think that's worth it. The things I've mentioned, I've covered it quite a bit, the differences. The negatives, I wouldn't really say anything. Like, it's literally an inch larger, an inch taller, inch wider, and an inch deeper at the back. So to me, that's not that much difference. So hey, if you want to spend the $50, go for it. You will get those extra features, and then it will come down whether you want to stick with a Lian Li, like a lot of people do, or you want to go with something a little bit different and go with the NV9. But the EVO XL is the $20. I think I said $30 cheaper before, but it is $20 cheaper. So you got to work out if you want this really nice cable management at the back, or something like the features like the EVO XL, the invertedness and the removable motherboard tray, and so on. But I think that is it for this video. I want to thank Phanteks for sending this out to check out. Also Alphacool for sending out all the water cooling for these reviews. And I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.